A charismatic Scotsman convinced an entire nation to gamble their fortunes on a dream, only to watch it collapse in a spectacular fashion. This is the story of John Law, and how he convinced a nation to bet everything on paper and nearly drove them to ruin. Our story begins in the late 17th century, a time of lavish courts and empty coffers. France, under the reign of Louis XIV, was swimming in debt. Enter John Law, a brilliant, if somewhat unconventional, thinker. Born in Edinburgh, this Scotsman had a radical idea. Instead of relying on gold and silver, why not use paper money backed by, well, by the future? Law wasn't just some dreamer. He had a solid understanding of finance, having studied banking in England. He proposed a system of paper currency issued by a national bank, something unheard of in the rigidly gold standard world of the time. He argued it would stimulate trade and industry. Now France was desperate. Their finances were a mess, and the traditional methods weren't working. Law, with his persuasive charm and innovative ideas, managed to gain the ear of Philippe II, the Duke of Orleans, who was acting as regent for the young King Louis XV. In 1716, Law established the Banque Générale Privée, a private bank that issued paper money. And guess what? It actually worked, for a while at least. The paper money was more convenient than lugging around heavy coins, and it did indeed boost the French economy. But Law wasn't content with just a bank. He had a grander scheme. He formed the Mississippi Company, a trading company with exclusive rights to trade in the vast, unexplored territory of Louisiana in North America. This was the key to his master plan, the Mississippi Bubble. The Mississippi Company was a bit of a gamble from the start. The potential wealth of Louisiana was largely unknown, and the reality of establishing profitable trade across the Atlantic was challenging. But Law was a master of hype. He painted a picture of untold riches, gold mines, fertile land, and a thriving fur trade. He started selling shares in the Mississippi Company, and the public, hungry for wealth and swayed by Law's promises, bought them up like hotcakes. The price of these shares skyrocketed. People were selling their land, their businesses, everything, to get a piece of this seemingly guaranteed fortune. The brilliance of Law's system was that the more shares were bought, the more paper money the bank could issue, supposedly backed by the increasing value of the Mississippi Company. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, but built on thin air. To further fuel the frenzy, Law merged the Mississippi Company with other French trading companies, creating the Company of the Indies, effectively giving it a monopoly over French colonial trade. This further inflated the perceived value and attracted even more investors. The streets of Paris were buzzing with excitement, people from all walks of life. Nobles, merchants, even the common folk were getting rich on paper. Lavish lifestyles became the norm. Among those swept up in the fervour was the renowned Comtesse de Parabère, a prominent figure in Parisian society. She, like many others, invested heavily, believing in the promises of Law's scheme. The Comtesse, known for her sharp wit and social standing, initially enjoyed the perceived wealth. She indulged in the newfound luxuries, much like many others. However, as the bubble began to inflate beyond reality, the Comtesse, along with countless others, would soon face devastating consequences. Doubts began to creep in. People started to question the true value of their paper fortunes. They wanted to exchange their paper money for real gold and silver. This is where the cracks in Law's system began to show. The Comtesse de Parabère, like many others who had invested their life savings, grew increasingly anxious as the value of her shares plummeted. The Banque Générale simply didn't have enough gold and silver to meet the demands. The value of the paper money started to plummet. The price of Mississippi Company shares also began to fall, and fast. The Comtesse de Parabère, who had trusted in Law's promises, saw her fortune vanish before her eyes. Panic set in. People who had become wealthy on paper now found themselves with worthless scraps of printed currency. The millionaires were suddenly bankrupt. The Comtesse de Parabère, once a celebrated figure, was now facing financial ruin, a stark reminder of the human cost of Law's ambitious gamble. In 1720, the bubble finally burst. John Law, once the celebrated financial wizard, was forced to flee France in disgrace. The public, understandably furious at the devastation, clamoured for his arrest. There were calls for justice, for Law to be held accountable for the widespread financial ruin he had caused. Though the French government initially considered arresting Law, the Duke of Orleans, who had benefited from Law's initial success, hesitated to take drastic action. Law, sensing the growing danger and the very real threat of mob justice, made a hasty escape. His escape was a desperate affair. Accounts suggest he left Paris in a hurry, likely with a few trusted individuals. The exact details of his departure are murky, but the urgency was clear. He wouldn't have had the luxury of a planned, leisurely exit. Word of his impending flight spread quickly, and the authorities, under mounting public pressure, were likely already issuing orders for his apprehension. There are reports of patrols being increased and roads watched for any sign of the disgraced financier. Imagine the tension, every coach, every inn, every crossroads a potential trap. Whispers of his identity would have been enough to alert authorities and trigger pursuit. There are historical accounts, though sometimes debated, that suggest several near misses. It's said that he was recognized at a roadside stop, or that a close call occurred at a border checkpoint, where his identity was almost revealed. The fear of being seized and facing the fury of the French people was a constant companion on his journey, huddled in his carriage, fleeing certain demise as the hands of the mob drew near. Despite the potential for capture, Law managed to evade his pursuers using a combination of speed, disguise, and perhaps his connections within the country may have also played a crucial role in his escape. Eventually, after a nerve-wracking journey, Law successfully crossed the French border, leaving behind the chaos and the financial ruin he had wrought. He found refuge in Venice, a city-state that offered him a degree of anonymity and safety from the immediate threat of French justice. He lived out the remainder of his life in relative obscurity, a shadow of his former influential self. He never faced formal justice in France for the immense damage he inflicted. The Comtesse de Parabère and countless others were left to pick up the pieces, their lives irrevocably altered by the Mississippi bubble. John Law's story serves as a vivid reminder that chasing get-rich-quick schemes can lead to a very painful crash, impacting not just abstract numbers on spreadsheets, but real people like the Comtesse de Parabère. So, the next time you hear about a sure thing, remember the man who tried to print a fortune and the bubble that burst, leaving a legacy of both innovation and devastating consequence.